part of the symposium. And of course, I mean, what I do is, let me just put up what this symposium is about. It just for 30 seconds, and then we can go into it. So this is what we are doing: mediation legislation. How, what, why, what, who, when, where, anything, all questions in relation to, we'll question everything. We won't leave anything out of the questioning part of it. So Sevil and Yıldırım from Sevil and Sultan. So that's about it, about this. And for the work that I am doing, people can find information on mediatorvikram.com. So I won't take time to even talk about it. So they can just go there and find the information. Let's put the link for a second up there so that we just for convenience. So this is what it is, mediatorvikram.com. And of course, you find information. Sultan has been on symposium with the earlier symposium also. She's been in some events. So that's about it, that you'll find information. I won't take anything longer. There's a World Mediation Circle that I'm creating, which of course in Turkey will do the activity. So it's all, both of you now, Sevil, Sultan, mediation legislation, please.
Thanks. Sevil, sen başla istersen.
I will start some share screen,
Yep.
screen sharing.
Hearing. Yes.
Go to the beginning. I will be talking what we have in Turkey as a legislation on mediation. To start with, I wanted to talk about a little bit about Turkey's culture and its traditions, legal traditions, because it leads to different styles, I think. Maybe the last bullet I have to tell first. Of course, we belong to the continental Europe, not common law countries. So we have relatively detailed legislation. We want to write everything down rather than making it simple. We want to determine everything, set the rules, but it's not that easy. You want to write everything, but always there are special cases. You cannot cover them all. And we cannot express ourselves very openly. We have an indirect communication, I would say. It's a bottleneck in mediation, generally. And it may be rude even to speak very direct. And Turkish people are collectivists, but still I believe actually they are individualists. They are always after individualistic needs once, but they don't like saying it openly. And conflict is taken as negative, and they want to refrain from conflicts. They don't like people who have conflicts. But once you are in a conflict, then you just jump over all that negotiation and talking. You just find yourself in an aggression, I would say, generally speaking. Not always, of course. In Turkey, we have high inflation and political instability from time to time. So I think we are used to uncertainties, and people can take really high risks. So they might say, okay, the court jurisdiction may have a lot of risks in itself, but still I want to take on that risk. And I believe that even if it is just 1% that I gain my case in a court, I want to go after that 1%. And so it makes an agreement in mediation process also harder. Also, we have disadvantaged groups, especially gender is a problem. There are also some regional issues. I could also add that here. And there are power imbalances. It is sometimes really very important because it is very hard to bring the parties to a balance. So especially these power imbalances make facilitating mediation sometimes difficult, and you want to intervene, you want to become something like a lawyer and defend one party. If the party in your eyes is very weak, you want to defend that party and staying on that facilitative area, not intervening and staying impartial. The limits of being impartial is sometimes difficult. So in Turkey, we have, as I said, detailed rules in general, and also in mediation, it's getting complexer every day. Even in these 2 days, we had 2 different legislation regarding the mediation. So always there is something coming on. And sometimes some of them are by the Constitution Court or some Court of Appeal. Sometimes they are cancelled because it gets into too much and they may also get cancelled later. But still, it is very, very flexible compared to all other areas. There is still too much to argue and find different applications among our peers. We all have very different attitudes and very different applications. You might find one mediator doing something and the other doing another thing, and they might be both right in their views. And of course, it's not only mediation, but we have several other alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. To start with, there is negotiation. You don't have to have a third party with parties represented by lawyers. You can just have a negotiation. And it is, you can find it in the Lawyers Act. By the way, we just call all lawyers lawyer, attorney, advocate. We don't have anything specific differences between them. They're all the same. If you are graduated from a law faculty, law school, you don't have to attend an exam. They are now bringing an exam, but it will be very, very easy and it won't make anybody, I don't think nobody will fail. Everybody will become lawyer. So, apart from negotiation, we have something called conciliation. But as far as I know, conciliation in your country is more like mediation in our country as terminology. In Turkey, what they call conciliation is about criminal code, not about private law. And in this conciliation, it is not only lawyers, but also psychologists or political sciences, administrative sciences. No, not psychologists, by the way. Administrative sciences, political sciences, and police academies. The graduates of these schools can also become a conciliator in criminal code. But the results may be binding on private law issues as well, especially about compensations. Assume there is a traffic accident. That traffic accident has both criminal side aspects and both about compensations, about insurance. So if you agree on conciliation, it will affect, you won't be able to go after some compensation later on because you already agreed about it. You must have already talked about it. And arbitration is also getting more and more connected to mediation. MEDAR is getting somewhat popular. Arbitration may be institutional or ad hoc arbitration. And there are some special procedures for consumers, insurance, and sports in arbitration. And also in commercial and investment-related disputes, it is getting more popular as well. And it's more parallel to a Singapore Convention, I would say, especially in commercial. And for national disputes and for the disputes with foreign elements, there are 2 different legislation, but they are quite parallel to each other. And arbitration, of course, is not a complete alternative, I would say, because it is still jurisdiction. The arbitrator would be deciding for you. And in Turkey, we have some milestones. The underlying act comes from 2012, but it came into effect in 2013. And this is more like the model UNCITRAL law, the model law, this 2013. And it is based on voluntary mediation. It is kind of simple and idealistic, I would say, but then it wasn't used mostly. It wasn't recognized by public. So to make people understand mediation, the benefits of it, the advantages of it, it became a requirement for labor law disputes. In 2017, the law came, and 18, it came into effect. Then with this labor law disputes, it became very popular. It had to be, because it was now a requirement. And then the requirement was extended to commercial law in 2019, to consumer law 2020. And lastly, just the new legislation will make it a requirement for disputes between tenants and renters, and disputes in apartments with your neighbors, and joint ownership. For such disputes, it will also become a requirement in September this year. And also we got a regulation in 2018. It set some details to the code, the first code. But still, it's actually not very detailed, I would say. But just because you go into different types of legal, labor, commercial, consumer, then you have to bring in some new codes. And for the mediators, it's always some challenge to find out at the beginning which type does this. Sometimes it is both commercial and consumer, for example. Then we must go on with the consumer type. And there are many files that we find that it's a problem. And which type of mediation? In Turkey, as a rule, we have facilitated mediation. And what we understand from mediation, even if we don't say anything, it is normally facilitated. By definition, I think mediation is facilitated. But we can find somewhere we find some new legislation that makes it look like evaluative. It is where if the parties cannot reach an agreement, if they get stuck somewhere, then the mediator doesn't have to, but can bring some alternative solution or solutions. And these are not binding, and they do not constitute legal advice, and the mediator should make it very clear that this is just a solution recommendation, but it doesn't mean a legal advice, and it doesn't bind you. The mediator should make it very clear on that point. And you don't have to do it. When I use this, I try not to make it something like a monetary value or something very specific. Rather, if I really feel that I should use it, I recommend a method or some perception. My solution is not just do this or do that, but you may try to think about this perspective. So I try not to use it mostly. And also there is one more thing about expert mediation. We get expertise, we have to get educations on those different types of legal codes to get files appointed to us. If I want to get files on commercial mediation, then I have to finish some education, get some education on commercial law and mediation on that aspect. But then I don't have any exam, just attending is enough there. So why do we have experts on those legal issues? That makes us think that so the mediator should be able to evaluate and understand the dispute on the legal aspect as well, because the parties may not be able to really cover and understand their rights. The mediator should understand it. There is something that is not talked here, and you have to go and understand it. The mediator should be able to say that. But also the voluntary mediation can be conducted as well there. And transformative mediation, it is for disputes among peers at schools, for children generally. It can be also used for political entities, for political disputes, I think. But it's not official. Transformative mediation is something that is just used out of record. We have some official statistics here. If you look at the statistics, it looks like that we really, I think it looks quite high, the rate of agreement, especially in voluntary agreement. It is almost 100%, but it's kind of misleading because they don't record the file if they don't get any agreement. So if they come to an agreement, then it is getting filed here. So we cannot know how much doesn't reach that point. And even for the other types, we cannot see something very important here, because even if it is a procedure, the mediator may be assigned by the parties, or the mediator may be assigned by the official bureau. It is something very significant. If the mediator is assigned by the parties, actually it is more like a voluntary mediation. And probably the parties had a negotiation among themselves before. Maybe they reached already an agreement and they just want to get that agreement signed by a mediator. It's quite possible that the mediator didn't really work to make parties to talk. Otherwise, if your file is assigned from the official bureau, then I would say the real rates are as low as 15 to 20%. But that's my personal view. I cannot prove that.
What we'll do is we'll go into the legislation a little more, because actually there is only about 12 minutes left. So let's just look at the legislation part, and in relation to also the ratification of the Singapore Convention, because Turkey is one of those countries which has done that. So little on that part, if we can. Because, because we want the,
Sultan was to talk about principles. Maybe you want to jump to this point.
Yes, Sultan, you'll have to unmute yourself, and let's go straight to the legislation part. Sultan, you'll have to unmute. You'll have to unmute. She's on mute. One second, let me just.
I can change the slides. Don't worry about the slides as we talk.
Yeah.
Sesin gelmiyor mu Sevil şu anda?
We can hear you now.
Hear me? Okay, okay, thanks. Main principles is negotiation, impartiality, equality, voluntariness, control in parties, confidentiality. Jurisdiction attached can be decided otherwise, some acceptation. Sevil, değiştirebilir miyiz? Deviation from the principles, voluntariness, apart from being required procedurally in many cases, the part that doesn't come up the first meeting without a valid excuse is obligated to pay all the judgments, fees, and expenses, even when the party is found to be right in his or her case. Impartiality, The fee of the mediator is calculated based on the agreed value of the dispute in case of an agreement. Otherwise, it is as a rule 2 hours of standard fee. As long as the party is informed about any potential search of partiality, e.g., representing one of the parties as a lawyer, the party may choose to accept the mediator to continue. Once assigned as a mediator, but to why parties for a dispute, the mediator later cannot act as a lawyer in the same dispute, but to why parties, but can still represent one is another dispute. Takeaways from Turkish experience: different cultures and traditions leads to different styles. Making mediation a prerequisite of jurisdiction helps people learn the concept and try it. However, it may be a negative experience for some. There are always good and bad examples. The focus stays in legal uses at the application is more of dispute statement rather than a mediation. Mediation is elastic and evolving from itself. Thanks.
Perfect. So Sevil, yeah, and Sultan, a little more about how, I mean, well, you've spoken broadly about the legislation, but is there anything specific that you want to talk about in terms of maybe the practical issues or anything like that? And of course, on the ratification of the Singapore Convention, part of it, if you want to talk about that also. Yeah.
So Turkey is one of the countries that ratified Singapore Convention, and in March we just had two recent news on the global scale, as you would know, about UK announcing that they will be signing the agreement, and also Uruguay ratified the agreement, and it will be coming into force in the following months, as I remember. And in Turkey, with this very recent legislation that I mentioned, we now have for commercial disputes that are international, it will be able to be forced to be, for example, if they have some properties in Turkey, they will be able to just go after those monetary issues. It will be enforced. You will be going to the commercial courts to get that approval. If you have a mediation agreement, you will just go to the commercial courts in Turkey, and it will be just looking at, it won't be going into the what do we call, it will be just analyzed on some procedural things, not going into the dispute itself.
So now what you have to tell me is about the mediations that happen outside the court system. So I said, let's call it private mediation, but that's a terminology. For me, that is mediation. What is happening in the court system, I have issues with, but okay, private mediation. So in that structure, how does that work? I mean, what is the legislation on that, and how does it work in terms of procedure and everything?
As far as I know, especially for family mediation, of course, it also has some court aspect, but generally it's not just the court, but more of families and relations. There are some people who have both psychology and law degrees, especially they are working, they're active on these. So especially for family, I would say, and for this where you have a lot of heirs, joint ownership, it was also something related to courts, but it is again not just courts but family issues, because you have to, there is somebody who died and you have to now split what is remaining to the family, but it is generally problems between brothers and sisters, it generally goes into other aspects of disputes. It is generally more of a psychological problem.
Okay, but Heidi, we'll get you in 2 minutes. I mean, we have this session has to go on for a little just 5 minutes. So then I'll get you in. And Julie came in and went out. You can ask her to come back. I don't know why she went out. But tell me, what you have to tell me is that procedurally, now if there is a dispute which is not in the court, there's a dispute that two people have and they want to mediate it, how will they go about it? What will be the procedure and what will happen in terms of appointment of mediator? Is there any restriction whom they can appoint? And then after that, their settlement agreement, what is the status of that settlement agreement? Just a little bit, let's just go through the law for that. Yes, Sevil Sultan, who's going to tell me?
Sorry, I thought you were asking to Heidi.
Oh.
I think it is just getting very newly understood by people. I would say maybe I did it for once. It was a dispute between a woman and a man. We talked a lot for weeks over some issues. But generally people do not realize the potential in mediation there, I would say.
Okay, so because
I think it will get more used.
Okay, so we'll just, I mean, idea is to understand how legislation in relation to, of course, courts, yes, and also private, how is it working? And I mean, we're a little understanding of how it happens. I know Sultan maybe wants to tell us a little bit about it. Sultan, what is your understanding of private mediation?
Private mediation.
Yeah, Sevil will translate. You can speak in Turkish. I understand Turkish very well.
Sevil, okay.
No,
Sevil bana yani soruyu tam açıklar mısın? Ben biraz kaçırdım. Çok algılayamadım.
Mahkemeyle alakalı olmayan şekillerde de arabuluculuk kullanılıyor mu? Hani hep böyle mahkemelerden bahsettiniz. Hani özel arabuluculuk deyince ne anlıyorsunuz diye soruyor. İlla hani bu davayla alakalı olmayan daha psikolojik, daha insani ilişkiler yönünden.
Ya ben istersen kısaca Türkçe anlatayım, sen olmazsa çevirirsin.
Tamam.
Şimdi bizim ülkemizde, yani senin de bildiğin gibi diğer ülkelerde özellikle aile arabuluculuğunda başlamış bu süreç. Ya bizde bu pratik yok. Bunun getirdiği yani aslında bunun olmuş olması belki toplumda uzlaşı kültürünün yaygınlaşması açısından daha kıymetli. Şimdi zorunlu olmasa bile ihtiyari olarak aile arabuluculuğu özellikle anlaşmalı boşanmalarda ve uygulanıyor. Yani bu alanda çok profesyonel bu işi böyle yürüten arabulucu ekip var, aile arabuluculuğu yapan ve çocuğun yüksek menfaati, özellikle ortak velayetle ilgili de çalışmaları var. Bu alanın kıymetli olduğunu düşünüyorum. Hani belki mahkeme bağlantılı da olacak ama diğer ülkelerdeki gibi olma olasılığı biraz zor. Nasıl yürüyeceğini ben de merak ediyorum. Ama bunun hani toplumda yaygınlaşması için de kıymetli olduğunu söyleyebilirim. Teşekkürler.
So,
yes,
if
sir.
I translate it, maybe I would be summarizing a bit. She also talked about the mediation and especially before divorce, there is a professional group of people doing it in Turkey. As I said, it is precious for this culture of agreement to get more widespread, and especially not for the parties, but for also the kids, the child. It is also important. And in addition to what Sultan says here, we can also add that there are some programs in schools. As I told you before, I went to a school and so we talked about some mediation. Of course, mostly I was talking, they were listening, but I tried to make also them to join in to the discussion. And sometimes also they have programs, they ask other kids to choose a mediator among themselves, someone who trusts, and those student mediators attend some programs and they meet professionals in the area and they get excited about it. They sometimes get some badges as mediators. I think that's a culture.
Okay, that we are, so that we'll talk about in the some other event about the culture of mediation and peer mediation, as they call it, or let's just call it school mediation for me. But thank you very much. We'll have that discussion in terms of the law. Yes, we have a discussion on the 19th. Please participate in that. So thank you very much, Sevil Sultan.
Thank you very much, Sevil
Pleasure.
and Vikram and other person.
Pleasure.
Thank you.